So the question is, how do you sell yourself in a coding interview with no experience? Because a lot of people probably just tell you to get out there and fail. And that's all you got to do. And eventually you'll learn and naturally get better. And just keep putting out more resumes. You'll be just fine. But that's not the best advice you could be getting. You could be doing a whole hell of a lot better. And I want to show you that today and talk you through at least 2 must-ask questions you have to have and 4 concrete topics in how to sell yourself. Now, in coding interviews, in how to sell yourself, this is not about selling yourself through writing more code or writing better code. This is going to be selling yourself from the perspective of everything you have to do outside of hitting the keyboard. And so as we cover this today, you're going to see a lot of different tips. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jason Humphrey. I help aspiring developers get their first high-paying job in coding and help them get ultimately into the fast lane of their career. That's why it's called Coding Career Fast Lane. And if you want more content like this, please, whether you're on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, any of them, hit the thumbs up because for one, that helps with all algorithms. For 2, if you're on something like YouTube, hit that subscribe and notification bell because the more these grow, the more they get shared, the more I get to do with them, and I can deliver even more and more content. And I love to do this because it truly does change people's lives when you take the advice and you enact on it and do something with it. And I love to see that. And so feel free at any time to ever come to one of the live Q&As. And as it is, they're normally before and after videos such as this. And I want to get into this right now because this is a topic that is not talked about enough, I believe. And if you've ever been in a sales process before, this is where we're going to start. And how to sell yourself is a sales process. What's one of the number one things you need to do in a sales process? Discovery. Discovery questions to understand your audience and who you're selling to. It's no different in the interview because to know truly how to sell yourself and what they want to hear and what you should be selling to them, you're going to have to dig for some information. Let's start with some easy information to dig with. What project might you be working on? And at the same time, what problem are they experiencing with this project? Because what you'll find is normally employers have a reason why all of a sudden they're hiring 3 to 4 to 5 people. They're trying to grow. They've lost people. They're trying to do something here. And they're running into problems and why they need you. And this is where discovery is great to try to understand what they're experiencing, the pain points, because you can use it back against them. But you'll see how we use it later on in the rest of this video. But you also have to understand how you're the solution. Now, that's a small point because we'll talk about it in the last part. But you got to understand how you come into play here. But the first thing you want to do is discovery. Because if you understand what it is they need, then you can sell it back to them. Now, let's talk about also how can you do it not only in the interview, but outside the interview. For one, talk to the recruiters. Ask the recruiters ahead of time, what is it this team is looking for? What problems are they experiencing? And why are they hiring now? And how can you help out in this? In the interview, when the interview gets started, if you have some previous information, you can ask questions to discover even more about the project, not just the problems, but also, oh yeah, I didn't get to talk about it with the recruiter too much because they didn't know anything about it, but tell me more about exactly what you're using and what you're trying to accomplish with it, maybe some pain points you're feeling. You can ask this stuff live because if you start to know the skills, if you start to know what the barriers are that they're experiencing and kind of how you fit into this picture live, you can use this later on. And this kind of leads me into my next point of, okay, what do you say? How do you take this information and say it? Well, for one, you use the START method. Now, if you're familiar with the STAR method, this is the exact same thing except you add a T on the end. And this is how you say it back to them. You use the situation, task, action, results, and then you add a tie-in. Now, I've talked about this in previous videos, so I won't go too in depth here, but the point is as you're given an answer and what you did this with Redux, which ultimately led to this from a management or state management perspective, and the user experience improved this much more. And then you tie it back into, and in doing that, I learned more about how to manage state effectively so the clients had a great experience. And you tie back, if they care about client experience, tie it back into that. If you care, if you know that they care about, the quality of the code, then you can talk about how implementing that and the quality it took to do that and how that ties into how you code from now on, because you knew what it did for the customer. You tie it back into what they care about most. Hence why we got to do discovery questions in the beginning of a coding interview. Because even before you get into coding, they're going to ask you questions. Now, at the same time, while you're in the coding process, what do you say as they ask you questions and as you think through your thoughts in your coding process? Well, you tie it back into what they care about most. And if we're tying it back in, while you're trying to understand something, you need to ask the questions to understand, how does this affect performance if they care about performance? At the same time, if they care about accessibility, would you like me to take on accessibility in the problem and really focus on that? You get a chance to not only say it with the STAR method as they ask you questions as you get started in this interview, but you could use it throughout the coding process. Now, in previous videos, I've talked about the coding process I like to utilize to help people follow. Here it is. The coding process I promote and like to talk about is where you first seek to understand, you pseudocode, you then review, you then code, and then you refactor. And throughout that process, you need to tie it back in and make sure you are tying back into what they care about most. And these are some of the things you start to say as you go through the process to sell them on why because you're understanding their needs very quickly and you're responding on the spot and live to do this. Now, let's also talk about what else are they going to ask you potentially in this, because almost all interviews, whether it's a consistently back-to-back or every other day or spaced out over a course of a couple weeks, some of the most consistent questions you'll see are that tell me about yourself, right? Even before you get into coding interview, you don't ever get in a coding interview and someone just says, all right, go code, see you later. No, there's normally an introduction phase. So to sell yourself, be ready for the tell me about yourself question. I'll do another video on that. I won't go super in depth on the tell me about yourself question right now, but that's a question that's going to be asked of you that you have a chance to sell yourself. And if you did the discovery from the very beginning, well, hell, you're ready to rock and roll for that. Now, there's one other question at the end of almost every interview they will ask, and that's sometimes it manifests as an elevator pitch question, but it generally tends to be, why do you believe you're a good fit for this job or this role, or why do you want this? And there's generally a chance that you can get set up for the elevator pitch. And that's one of the things you need to prepare for. I won't go super in depth on that now, but let's focus on the last little piece here of how to sell yourself in an interview. So if you've done the discovery and you're using the tie-in, you're following your coding process and kind of constantly tying it back into them, you're prepared for the tell me about yourself question to sell yourself, you're prepared for your elevator pitch, what's the last thing you need to do? You need to ask 2 questions, all right? And the first is, what is success? It's ultimately a value question that you're asking for to understand your value and what you can provide here. But what does success look like in this role? It's basically another discovery question. You could have used it up in the discovery questions if you so choose. But it's really impactful to use for you because it's going to help you in other interviews. And it's going to help you understand what they need most right now, because success in this role is going to be this ideal of what they're looking for. Now, the other question you need to ask to sell yourself in the interview at the very end is, and this is if it's going well, where do you see I could drive the most impact on the team? And when they answer this, what you're forcing them to do, not only subconsciously forcing them to think about you on the team, but you're now forcing them to think through where it is they could place you and what could you do. And they're going to have to name off some tasks, some items, some technologies that you'll be using that you can then use in your thank you email. And if you ask those 2 questions, or make sure they're asked, regardless if it's at the end or not, you have really good information to go off of. Now, the last thing, as I was just saying, but I just want to highlight it, point it out, don't forget to send a thank you email, because from the moment you stepped in and you discovered their problems, to as you answered their questions, you tied it in, to then when you're in the code and you are utilizing what they care about most and selling it right back to them, to answering maybe the elevator pitch at the end, to finally hitting them, what does success look like in this world? What are y'all looking for? And where do you see that I can drive the most impact? You will provide a complete experience of being able to sell them what they want most out of you and help them understand how you can help them most. Now, as we come to the end of this video, if you want more content like this in the future, make sure you hit the thumbs up, subscribe, notification bell, join the groups. Would love and appreciate that because it helps the channel, helps LinkedIn, helps all of the socials grow. But as we summarize this in one last little bit here, I encourage you, if you want to sell yourself and you're worried you have no experience, everything I talked about today doesn't need experience. It needs you taking the time to understand your audience. You can also do that ahead of interviews through job descriptions. You can do it ahead of interviews through talking to recruiters. But also when you get in there, it doesn't matter if you have 6 years, 10 years experience. What matters is you ask the right questions. You then take that information and then you use it to the best of your ability to show them why you over anyone else. And you must prepare for the elevator pitch, you must prepare for the tell me about yourself, and you must prepare to handle your coding process throughout the entire interview. And lastly, make sure you ask the right questions at the end and send a damn good thank you note. That's going to do it for us today. If you like today, remember, subscribe, and we'll see you all again soon.